I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Last March, the Center for an Urban Future, a policy institute here in the city, published a comprehensive report on the condition of the city's infrastructure. In its report called Caution Ahead, Overdue Investments for New York's Aging Infrastructure, they conclude that a significant portion of New York's essential foundations for city life are more than 50 years old and badly in need of repair. Adam Forman, a researcher at the center, is the report's author, and he's my guest today. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I read the report, and what's interesting to me is I live on a street on the west side of Manhattan, 57th Street, which is going to have on it the largest single apartment house ever in the city and the tallest residential building in the world.
Yep.
So we worry about the impact of those developments on the infrastructure. But your report says that we have to worry about the infrastructure as it now is, right?
Absolutely.
It's amazing that we have to get up to par before we can begin to accommodate all this stuff. Let's define infrastructure for people. What does it include?
Infrastructure is the conduits that carry essential resources and upon which we have really critical economic and social interactions. So it could be buildings where we teach, buildings where we deliver hospital services, or it can be conduits that deliver gas, water, and all these critical services that are necessary for the function of our country.
Transportation, roads?
Transportation, absolutely.
And we include the MTA in there?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the tracks or the everything.
It was a comprehensive study for sure, yeah.
So it's public buildings, basically.
Yeah.
Is there, and there are many of them.
Public buildings, absolutely.
No, I mean, there are many of these things all underneath the ground.
Yeah, that's what's extraordinary. And a lot of New Yorkers don't see these conduits, these gas mains, the water mains, the sewers, but they're so critical. And every time we open up a street on 57th Street or anywhere else, you see this incredible maze that needs to be taken care of.
Do we know what's under there? Do we have a census, a map?
Not everywhere, actually, which is shocking. Our city is quite old. It was one of the first founded in the nation. And in downtown Manhattan, there are actually areas where a water main will break and the DP won't know where it is, and it'll take hours just to locate it, let alone fix it.
And so they won't know what that water break is affecting.
Exactly, that as well, because you'll see electric conduits underneath it that it could be rotting in the process.
Right. So what's in the worst condition?
What's in the worst condition? That's tough to say. I would say a lot of our conduits are quite old. We have water mains and sewer mains that about 1,000 miles, over 100 years old. Which is significant. And it's not just the age, but it's the material. It uses uncoated steel, cast iron, that's just more prone to rusting.
So that's reflective of the age?
Reflective of the age,
yeah,
absolutely.
Because of new things. And the wiring, the electrical stuff, how does that get laid? Who does that? Is that done by individual companies and stuff?
So for the electricity, Con Ed is a sole distributor in New York City. And actually, people don't realize it, but New York City is very, very fortunate. We have the most reliable electricity grid in the world. I mean, Con Ed is fantastic at delivering electricity, but it is quite expensive, and it's something that needs, that often disrupts our streets because they need to constantly be going underneath the street to fix it.
But Con Ed doesn't supply the whole city, or does it? What's National Grid?
National Grid is for gas. So gas is split between National Grid and Con Ed, and electricity is just Con Ed.
Right. And is the city moving, well, I mean, everything has such an effect on everything else, right?
Yeah.
So the environmental change in the grade of oil has what? What has that led to?
Yeah, so under Bloomberg administration, they banned number 4 and number 6 heating oil. Not immediately, but effective in the coming years.
And the reason they did that?
Because it was dirtier. It was a great move.
You could see those black plumes coming up, right?
Yeah, this is an issue, and Bloomberg was very, very good on sustainability. Plan NYC was an excellent plan, thinking about how we can make our city safer and greener. So he banned that oil, but that means we need to get it from somewhere else. And the gas, natural gas, was a cleaner fuel, but connecting it to buildings. When you're, like you said, there's new buildings coming up, those need to be connected. Existing buildings need to be connected. So there's always, our city is always in the process of being built. So
go back to the question of whether there's a map. Of the facilities that we know exist, is there a map that you can tell? Is it computerized? Can you push a button and see a certain area where everything is?
Yeah, Con Ed and National Grid have become very sophisticated in locating their mains, in tracking their mains.
And what about water?
Water, absolutely as well. It's actually interesting in that the reconstruction of sewers and water mains actually decreased in the last years of the Bloomberg administration. So they weren't replacing these old mains as quickly as they had been, but the number of leaks actually went down. And that's because they were using computers to track
To
you
where
know, where
everything-
their leaks were, and also changing the pressure on the water at different times of night.
And we could tell where the subway tracks are in relationship to the different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's fascinating. Where is all that housed? Do you-
Whereas it's in some cases not in one place.
Yeah.
And I think that's an issue, is that all of this underground infrastructure is owned by Con Ed, National Grid, Verizon, DEP, the city, and yet sometimes there isn't coordination of when we repave a road, let's make sure that we're all fixing it at one time. And I think the city and Mayor de Blasio is really stepping up in that regard. And they're convening all these interests to make sure that we're coordinating reconstruction.
Are they coordinating planning?
They are now.
How do they do
For
that?
a while, what they did is the DOT would say, we're reconstructing or repaving a street. Let's send a memo out. Everybody come in while we're open for this 6 months and fix your mains. Now they're doing it, not just the city tells the utilities, but utilities tell the city, these are our most imperative reconstructions that we need to make. So let's coordinate. Maybe you can repave there because we really need to be fixing that in the coming months. So it's going both ways.
And how do we decide when the planning is for development?
Yeah.
Now what happens?
Yeah, so often there's an environmental impact statement where before you build or before you upzone an area or downzone an area, you need to look at what's the impact on the infrastructure of the neighborhood. And that's done, and it's a very long process, and really it's become more of a legal process than a planning process, which is really unfortunate.
Are you satisfied with that?
No, I'm really not. And
Why?
I think a lot of
Tell me
people
why.
aren't. One issue is, so when you do this study of the environmental impact, you look at mitigations, you know, what we need to do to make sure the environmental impact doesn't strain the area. Well, these mitigations aren't collected in a single agency and then determined we need to fix these mitigations. No one's really in charge of them. And sometimes you'll have two developments next to each other and there'll be contradicting mitigations and those will never be reconciled. So it's not really, there's no clearinghouse to figure this out.
How do they just, I'm asking this now, and I have to admit it really out of personal interest because of the development in our community.
Yeah.
But how do they decide the area of the environmental impact statement?
Actually, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
It depends what they're looking at. So when they upzone an area, it'll be the entire neighborhood. And when it's an individual building, you know, it depends on how big the building is and what they think the impact.
Because this 57th Street, right off the West Side Highway, whatever it's called now, 57th Street, sanitation facility. Across the street is a brand new building with a lot of units going up. That's on the same block as a building that was put up a couple of years ago that has many units in it. 2 blocks above is Riverside. What's the new Riverside?
Riverside 1, is that what it is?
Yeah,
Not sure.
well, it's not the old Riverside South, it's
Yeah.
Riverside, whatever it is. All of those new buildings, and then the other buildings. But the impact statement was just done on the one thing.
Yeah.
So you didn't have a cumulative effect. And
Yeah,
it's
and
very-
that's another real issue,
Yeah.
is they'll do it individual building at a time
Yeah.
and not look at cumulative effect of
Yeah.
one building bringing in 600 units is a lot different than 5 buildings bringing in 3,000 units.
So if we were to go ahead and repair what you found to be deficient, it would estimate, you estimate 47 point
$47
something?
billion, and that actually doesn't include DEP, water and sewer infrastructure. So we're talking
Oh,
a
it
couple
doesn't?
billions on top of that.
Yeah.
That included MTA, it included New York City Housing Authority, all of New York City agencies. But yeah, it's a huge price tag, and we're estimated that over the next 4 years, there's actually a $34 billion gap between the 47 we need to spend versus what we're actually
And
spending.
your 47 is over 5 years.
Or 4 to 5
4
years,
to 5
depending
years.
on the capital.
And that's not including the rebuilding or the mitigation because of the hurricane.
Exactly. Yeah, this is only state of good repair. It's not Sandy, it's not new development, which are also going to be very
Are
expensive.
you satisfied with what they're doing as a result of I don't mean to take a detour.
Yeah. I think that the report that came out right afterwards, the
Yeah.
SIR report, was excellent, done by the Office of Long-Term Planning. Also, EDC was involved. I think they really understood what needed to be done in terms of housing development, in terms of neighborhoods, in terms of green infrastructure and all that types of infrastructure. But implementation is expensive. I think it's going to be a long process.
I know that people live there in their homes and they've been born there and they die there and everything else. But we're assisting people to rebuild in the same areas that we know are going to be prone to the bad effects of another hurricane.
Yeah.
Is that good?
No, absolutely not. And I think that was an issue, and it was a debate afterwards. Are we going to buy out these areas that are really hurricane prone in Staten Island, in Brooklyn? And I don't think there was an aggressive push to do it.
Right.
There were some neighborhoods in Staten Island that voluntarily said, we're all collectively going to move out, and now that's going to become wetlands, but it didn't happen in enough
Yeah.
areas.
And we're giving some kind of tax assistance to some people who are rebuilding, I think, but I'm not quite
And that's
sure.
important, and that was something that came out in the Bloomberg plan and now being adopted by de Blasio, is putting houses on stilts, fortifying
Right.
homes. But it's not possible. When you have 5 homes connected to one another, you're not going to put them on
Well,
stilts. So
and
some
then-
areas it works.
And then when I remember seeing on the news, someone had put it on stilts and the neighbors were all objecting because it was making it ugly and stuff in the middle of their low houses.
Well, this is a huge issue everywhere. Putting up dunes is
Yeah,
so important.
yeah.
And you saw
happened?
what's at the end of Coney Island, that private area.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to put dunes
Right.
there, and that's an issue all across the Jersey Shore, St.
Sheepshead Bay
Kitts.
and stuff.
You
Yeah, I
know,
know.
and it's so important for protecting the neighborhoods, and yet people don't want to lose their views, or people don't want houses on stilts. So this aesthetic versus fortification concern is unfortunate.
And then the other day, another example of development and what are you going to do is they're repairing the Q train. And it's 2 cars, is that right, or 4 cars? And it's already crowded, and this is in Long Island City or Greenpoint where all the development is, so how are we ever going to do that? Anyway,
Yeah.
how are we going to pay for all this?
I think we need a lot more new income sources, is really a big point. Dedicated revenue sources. I actually wrote an editorial last week for the Gotham Gazette. One area is the new settlement with BNP Paribas. People talk about this is $4 billion that goes to the state, goes to the city. Let's do a one-time deal where we put a lot of money into infrastructure. We recommended instead was actually put into a trust. You know, if you put that $4 billion endowment, assuming a 7% interest rate, that's $200 million every year in perpetuity. You know, that's enough to improve 1,400 miles of repaving streets. It's really significant in New York City for New York State.
But basic to that, though, is we have to raise the consciousness, don't we?
Oh,
Of
absolutely.
the people who are deciding
Yeah.
where the money goes, or who are making different
Yeah.
laws and rules for how do you get the money.
Absolutely. And the congestion pricing,
Right.
a fiasco under the Bloomberg administration. And it was unfortunate that we didn't get the legislation that was so critical for fortifying our transportation infrastructure. But on the other hand, it did raise awareness. You know,
Yeah.
For the first time, politicians need to dig through and look how old our subways were, and our bridges were, and our roads were.
In our street,
And-
right?
yeah.
The streets are, because now we resurface, but we don't go under.
In some cases, we do reconstruct, and that's what's so important.
Yeah.
Resurfacing is not enough.
Right.
It's that base layer underneath the road that if it's falling apart, it's not absorbing the vibrations of cars and trucks, which then shakes the utility mains underneath.
You know, I was thinking the other day with the bike lanes. They're very nice. I don't like bikes in the center business
Yeah.
district. I just think, but they're taking space off the roads. So that's decreasing the amount of paved roads that cars go on, which then increases the load on them. Did anybody ever?
Yeah, I wonder
Do they
about
pay
that.
that
I mean,
attention?
in some ways, bikes are lighter. I mean, they're also on the concrete, so
Right,
maybe
but
it's less.
you think it evens out?
Yeah, I would think it would even out. Because often what they're doing is it's road diets, where they'll go from 2 lanes to 1 and have
Yeah.
a bike lane,
Yeah.
so it would actually be less impact
Yeah.
potentially if it's only 1
Except
lane
that
rather
it's
than
constant
2.
more. It's
All the
longer
same
hours
area.
on the other stuff.
It could be, yeah.
I used to take the trolley car to high school. Did we take those tracks up on Broadway and other places?
We've taken those tracks everywhere. Actually, I'm in Crown Heights, and
Yeah.
I was riding on the street, and my bike actually got caught in, and I found trolley tracks. They've
Isn't
been
that
taken out in
amazing?
the 30s.
Yeah.
It's wild. Yeah, they were all lifted.
Yeah.
A lot of the elevated lines were taken away as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
There's actually conversation about reintroducing a trolley line from Red Hook to Long Island City. That's an area that's really underserved, especially the Queens-Brooklyn connection. Where it's going, I'm not sure.
And
but
that's significant less money because
then
it's
going
not tunneling and
underground.
everything.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
incredible. And that's really unfortunate. With New York City system, we need to expand. We don't have those connections between the outer boroughs. Everything's
Right.
into Manhattan, but it costs $2 billion to do a mile
Right.
of new rail line. We're actually the least efficient builders of rail lines in the world.
Trolleys are wonderful, though. They
Yeah.
were really fun and great.
Yeah.
So let's go back to how we're going to pay for it. I mean, it cries out for creative funding.
Yeah.
Right? And yet we never have that.
Yeah, and I think once again, we're pushing some form of the congestion pricing. Sam Schwartz put out a plan where he introduces a fee on the East River bridges and then actually decreases the fee on outer borough bridges, and it would lead to about $500 million of new revenue, which could go into the transportation and also the
It
subway
certainly makes
system.
sense. I mean, we go to visit people in Far Rockaway. How much? I mean, it costs them a lot of money just
Yeah.
to go over that little bridge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Gil
And Staten
Hodges
Island.
or whatever it might be, yeah, and decreasing those prices, but introducing a fee to the East River bridges. And it's not just about a new revenue source. because those bridges are free, naturally cars want to go the freeway rather than going
Yeah.
through the Hugh Carey tunnel.
Right.
And what it does, it leads to extra congestion on those bridges, which reduces their useful life.
Right.
So if we were to put a fee on that, it would actually deter traffic, which would allow them to be
And what
cheaper
is
to
he
maintain.
estimating the fee would be? Does he give that? He must have. He's
Yeah,
got price.
$5 during non-peak, for Easy Pass, 7 for non-Easy Pass.
Still a lot of money
Yeah.
for people commuting.
Yeah, it's not insignificant, but it saves money for on the Whitestone Bridge, on the Gil Hodges
Right.
Bridge, and the Outer
But
Bridge.
all our transportation is expensive. I mean, even the subway.
Yeah,
For
absolutely.
working people, it's a very hard thing
Yeah.
to have to pay for.
And the subway, the fees, the MTA cards only cover 70% of the operation costs of the subway. It needs a lot of subsidies. So, you could say it's expensive to ride the subway, but actually we're not paying enough to actually pay for the operating of the system.
But the Port Authority takes the revenues from airports and uses it other places,
So this is a different issue, and it's a really
like
important
the
one.
Pulaski Skyway.
Exactly. There is a law by the FAA that you can't take money out of the airport revenue and invest it in other parts of the city. And this was created because a lot of people were using their airports as a cash cow. The one city that got an exception was New York City, because we had this Port Authority system where it should have been shared revenue, sometimes take money out of the airports and put it into bridges, sometimes go the other way. Well, it's not going the other way. It's often airports, extracting money from airports to invest in the PATH train or to invest in real estate holdings that have been losing money for decades. And this is a real issue. We need to be keeping more money in the airports because we have really inadequate airports in the city.
We do, and they're getting worse and worse, right?
Absolutely.
But Newark has that been the recipient of more money? The Newark Airport, it seems to me, has been
Yeah.
more recently.
We looked at mostly LaGuardia and JFK.
Uh-huh.
What Newark is getting is actually an air train now, a second train connection to the airport, which is, they're getting a second air train connection when LaGuardia has no train connection. So unfortunately,
I used to work at the Port Authority, and I worked on on trying to connect the plane to the train to the plane, and using these abandoned railroad tracks that go through Woodhaven and other places, and it was, Port Authority dropped, it was a takeoff on Ford's New York, whatever it was dropped
yeah.
it. Anyway,
And that's still abandoned. They're not using that. They're talking about turning it into the Queensway
Yeah.
Park, but also you can reactivate it as a rail line. And that would actually allow the G train to go further out to Forest Hills. It would allow that train to go all the way from Woodhaven to Rockaway. So it's a new train line that could be implemented.
but, the Port Authority sells bonds and finances its projects. Why can't there be some kind of an authority established for infrastructure in the city? Why?
Yeah, and
Is it because we already sell municipal bonds? Why?
yeah, and in some ways we do. I mean, the MTA is an authority,
Yeah,
and the Port
right.
Authority is an authority. So a lot of our infrastructure, and the DEP also, we have the Water Authority. All of our water and sewer is taken care of by an authority as well. So that was state of the art in the 1930s and 1940s when Robert Moses was creating all of these authorities, and it's still being pursued. The Water Authority was created in 1985, so it's happening.
Does the Water Authority pay for the repair of the?
Of the water and sewer
It
assets.
does.
It does, yeah. So all of water fees go directly to the water system to pay off bonds for the sewer and water system and wastewater treatment plants.
Do you
filtration.
suggest raising water fees? What do you suggest about, there's something surface, something water, what is that?
Yeah, so the surface water management fee, it's not necessarily increasing water rates. It's right now what we do is we charge X amount for the water you use, and then that 169% of that for the sewer, because it costs money to, when you flush your toilets, when you put water down the faucet. What we recommend is rather than just having this arbitrary 169% sewage fee, introducing a surface water management fee. And what that would do is the more permeable material you have on your house, whether it's more grass, more trees, a green roof, the more water you're absorbing, so it's not going into the sewer
See,
system.
so it's a hope of,
It's trying to incentivize people
Yeah.
to capture water on their households rather than
Right.
putting it into the sewer system. So if you have all concrete, you're going to pay the full fee. If you're all greenery and green roofs,
interesting.
you'll pay less. And the issue is our sewers are really overtaxed right now. They can't absorb all the water that's coming on a rainy day, so it's important to get private households involved in absorbing the water so we don't overburden our sewer system.
so doing that, I mean, that retrofitting or being more environmentally conscious brings up the question of why we're not having some kind of a public program for training and employment. I mean, I don't know, you didn't put into this report retrofitting of buildings and things, did you?
We had talked about it in a previous report, actually,
Yeah.
Innovation in the City, where, and actually we talked a bit about
did.
on this one as well. In Toronto, they had this really great program where they retrofitted all of their 1960s cement buildings, which couldn't hold on to heat in the winter, and couldn't absorb heat in the summer, and it was a real issue, and it was leading to very high energy bills. Similarly, NYCHA could be doing the same thing, recladding their buildings, and you'd be saving lots of money on gas and electricity.
Right.
It's an opportunity to really update these buildings.
And it's an opportunity for a whole new source of jobs.
Yeah, and this is
and
something,
careers.
Absolutely, and this is something we've really stressed. This is a great way. This is a great way to build up the middle class. This is one of de Blasio's themes, this tale of two cities. We have this great inequality. We need to fortify the middle class. Jobs and infrastructure are a way to do it. If you have $1 billion invested in sewer replacement, is 14,000 jobs, 14,000 well-paying jobs. So we think it's really critical to invest in existing infrastructure.
So how do we go about doing that?
I think prioritization is so critical. And we're seeing from the de Blasio administration, at least on roads, on convening of different utilities, that he is very intentional and is aware of these issues and is putting more resources into them. But of course, more needs to be done. It needs to be a priority for the city and for the state.
And what about the city council? Do they show the same kind of foresight and planning? Some.
Some. I think the city council is really trying to become more, to strengthen its own institution right now. Based on the charter, the mayor has a lot of power and the city council has very little. But they're changing their structure so that they have a bill drafting unit, so that they're more capable of introducing legislation rather than waiting on the mayor to write it.
And they have the opportunity also to phrase, to present a whole new approach to something.
And they're building their policy team just for that.
Right.
So a bigger policy team than they've ever had.
Right.
So I think that they're going to become a bigger player in these issues,
Right.
absolutely.
If you can only convince some of them, right?
Yeah, and actually Dan Garodnick was the council member who introduced the increased funding for street repaving. So we're seeing them take a leadership role on this.
What are we going to do with the East Midtown development?
Yeah, I think actually that's another area where Mr. Garodnick is involved. And I think the first steps have been encouraging. I know he allowed a couple of new buildings in exchange for major infrastructure increases, particularly with Grand Central Station, with the trains there. And I think that needs to be part of the conversation. Anytime you're doing new buildings, you need new infrastructure.
So, and there they were talking about the developers contributing to some of the MTA expenses. But you cite London as an example of a different way of doing this, as far as, it was very interesting, I thought, of putting it into the development area.
Absolutely. So it's something called the Community Infrastructure Levy. And what it is when a new train comes in, the residences near that area, any new development has to pay, in London, a £2 tax for every square foot of new development. When new transportation comes in there, that leads to great opportunities for these developers. It creates big profits for them. So those big profits should be shared with MTA, with the city. I think a great opportunity for that would be the second spur of the 2nd Avenue subway. So that's going to go into East Harlem. It's going to spur a lot of new development. Those new developments should be paying in to make sure that they're also paying the MTA because they're profiting from the MTA.
And what about these tall buildings that are going to cast shadows on Central Park? They should also have to pay something, no?
Yeah, I think any new development should certainly be contributing to infrastructure stress. It's great.
So that would be a whole new phase of development. I mean, it would be adding another thing to it.
Absolutely. It's something called value capture, where basically any new sewer line or road or MTA is creating a lot of value for developers, so developers should have to contribute to that as well because they're profiting.
That's the history that some people say was corrupt, and that when the Broadway subway was first planned, these major financiers bought property right off the line, and they made lots of money.
No, absolutely. That's how Moses built a constituency. He'd keep it secret where he's going to build a new bridge.
So
but he'd tell the
history never
people who had
changes, right?
Yeah, it's true. But now this is reversing it. Rather than letting them cash in, we want developers to help us build this new infrastructure.
I think it's a terrific idea.
Yeah.
And you need to find someone who's going to take it and then start talking about it in the council and other places.
And I think this seems like a perfect policy for de Blasio. I mean, it's perfect timing because of the second spur of the 2nd Avenue subway working with MTA to introduce this kind of special development district where you would introduce a new tax for new development where new transportation is being introduced.
When you guys do these studies and you come up with conclusions that are very helpful, do you consult with political people who have an understanding about how you do these things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really the strength of our organization in general. Is for this report, I did 100 interviews, 120 interviews. So looking at the financial statements, looking at the capital plans of the organization is important, but actually understanding from those who are pivotal players in this process, what's possible, what's not possible, where are their issues, I think is so critical. And we talk to lots of politicians, lots of people in every agency, in the mayor's office, so we can know the feasibility of what can be reformed and what can't.
But the goal should be what should be, not what's possible.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we're missing a lot of in in the public sphere. I mean, I think that de Blasio shows a lot of that.
Yeah.
But we have to move ahead because we're really in a crisis, aren't we?
Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important to have turnover of administrations, turnover in agencies. People ultimately, at the end of 12 years, become
you get
defenders
too
of the
used to it.
status quo. You know, they know what can't be done, so they won't
Right.
even touch new issues.
Right.
Let new people come in and realize what can't be done, but also what people were realizing should have been done, but
Right, right.
weren't ready to push it.
Yeah, and there really should be no reason why something can't be done, because then you can keep refining it so that it can be done. I mean, I think you have to start with that objective.
Yeah, and I think Mayor Bloomberg, to his credit,
Yeah.
put
He had his own agenda.
historic, but he did put a historic amount into
Yes.
infrastructure, more than any of his predecessors. Sometimes it was new construction when we need to be taking care of state of good repair existing infrastructure, but really the largest capital budget of any mayor in recent history.
And we're facing, though, a serious problem in Washington because the funds that used to come and really enabled some ambitious projects
Yeah.
have disappeared.
And that's really a major
Yeah.
issue. And Washington is having a lot of trouble passing this transportation budget.
Yeah.
And we need those
Right.
dollars. And I think a lot of the DC money came for new construction. You know, it's very exciting for politicians to cut the ribbon on a new highway.
They love that.
You know, it's very exciting. And I think, our sewer system and our highway system was funded by the national government when it was built. But what about now when we need to rehabilitate it? You know, those dollars are now so critical.
Well, Adam, please keep studying and keep writing reports and keep changing the world. Thanks
Absolutely.
very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.